I think being raised in an incredibly spiritual community where, I feel like as I move through the world and I enter into communities where there isn't the same amount of combined belief system, a combined belief. And I feel like I've been in the presence of many people who are believing the same thing and have a strong intention and prayer, and we've made it rain. We've created miracles, magic, for lack of a better way to say that. And because of that experience, I believe I've felt that I was given a door or an access, a way to access that in my life. That became, that's how it's done, And so I'm grateful for my mom for really building us into a really hyper spiritual environment, but also an entire community with combined belief system and a very strong belief system in something greater. And I feel like the metaphors, the patterns and the metaphors of in the art practice and in the creative process that represent that very thing, that represent that relationship, that represent that road towards communication with a Most High, with the Creator, has been vital to me. And to be able to go into my studio, which is a clay vessel, that is nestled in the center of a permaculture school, a nonprofit where we work on cultural preservation and sustainability. That's then in our community of Santa Clara Pueblo. That's then nestled between the Sangre de Cristo and Jemez Mountains in this basket, these arms that is our ancestral homelands, that is connected to our entire belief system, that I get to do this here, that I get to create these pieces here and access, using the tools of creative processes, I get to access that energy and every day I get to use that to find ways of expressing that. It is my heart's desire that this work go out and show people who don't have that privilege of access to something more powerful than what we've known, to find that within themselves.
Welcome, everyone. I am excited to introduce you to Rose B. Simpson for the Creativity and Context session. My name is Jennifer LeBaron. I'm with the Center for Action and Contemplation. I'm one of the program managers. Last year, I was the event manager for CONSPIRE 2020. That was a sold-out event. This event is sold out. That event was sold out. But it got COVID canceled, unfortunately. Rose was slated to be our in-person artist to speak about art and place and sustainability and how it, the Great Spirit informs all of her work. So we asked her to please participate live with us here, but virtual, of course. We won out over Switzerland. She has she's top 10 out of hundreds of exhibits in Switzerland Art Festival right now. So we're grateful that you're here with us, Rose. But let me tell people a little bit about you. Rose is a mixed media artist from Santa Clara Pueblo. Her work engages ceramics, metal, fashion, performance, music installations, writing, and custom cars. There's hardly nothing that this woman doesn't do. She received an MFA in ceramics from Rhode Island School in Design in 2011, an MFA in creative nonfiction from the Institute of American Indian Arts in 2018, and is collected in museums across the continent and has exhibited internationally, and she continues to do that. She lives and works from her home in Santa Clara Pueblo and hopes to teach her young daughter how to creatively engage the world. She is represented by Jessica Silverman Gallery in San Francisco and Chiaroscuro Contemporary Arts in Santa Fe. She did make some art specifically for exhibit for the constituents at the in-person event, which she will show you here. And she's holding for everybody watching now for a limited period of time. We wanted very much, since we couldn't be in person, to capture Rose in her element in her studio. So we went to her studio and captured her there talking about her work. So we're going to go into that, and then we'll be back live with her to have dialogue. But before we do, Rose, can you tell the audience what we are about to see together?
Thank you for having me, Jennifer. It's good to be here in this community. It was an honor to be invited to speak through CAC and into this project, and to speak to the large community that has a lot of investment into conscious mannerism. That's what I would call it. And so it was so cool that there was a film crew that got to come to my studio and enter into my creative space, and I got to share some of my processes with everyone there, and everyone gets to see that video. There's no internet in my studio, and so it's a really cool opportunity to enter into that for lots of people. And I really feel like creativity is the hand of the creator. That innovation is what brings us all to this moment, and will build the next, and we're co-creating that reality. So welcome to this video, and I'll see you all on the other side. Hi, welcome. My name is Rose B. Simpson, and we're here in my studio in Santa Clara Pueblo in northern New Mexico. I'm an artist I'm a sculptor mainly in ceramic, mixed media, custom cars, and I also do performance art and writing. So welcome. My piece is titled Creativity in Context, and we're going to talk about how my context and my background being from this area and from this place has informed the journey into my aesthetic and creative processes. So what I wanted to start with was an ancestral piece from this area. So this pot was found in an ancestral site a little bit west of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this pot is from about 11 to 1300 AD. And why I wanted to talk about this pot is because for the indigenous people of this area, the people that I come from, our aesthetic is tied inextricably with place and the context. And so what we see on this pot is actually so many metaphors and representations of actually our environment, from the landscape to the weather to even to the sort of the stars and the astrological aspects of existence. This is ceramic, and ceramic is a material that my people have worked with for a very long time, and is passed down to me through my matrilineal side from here at Santa Clara Pueblo and this area. So here in this slide we see on the right, this was a drawing I did for Chaco Canyon National Historic Park. They had an event there where they were looking at sort of some of the architecture, the ancestral sites, but also the relationship between the place and the celestial bodies, right? So the astronomy, the really heightened sense of astronomy that the architecture and the place was built on. And they asked me to do an image for that. And I like to use this in my presentations because it has bits and pieces of the pottery itself, also the lines that represented the astrological moments that were moving through space, as well as the T-shaped doors that went from room to room that talked about sort of going deeper into and within, and also navigating the source and place, but also the representations of our fields, how that looks like the walls, how that looks like the stars, etc., how that's also our ceremonial center. And on the left is a photograph of a wall from an ancestral site at Aztec Ruins National Monument, where there was actually a line of blue rocks that were set into the wall and then were plastered over. So you would never see it, but it was this sort of embedded thing in the wall. And I always thought about intention over sort of the aesthetic outcome in the end. And so what I like to talk about is how I was raised to understand ourselves in context. So here on the right, this image on the right, you see some of a bowl in some of the Sangre de Cristo mountain range, which is directly, actually where my studio is here in northern New Mexico. We have fields outside where we grow our ancestral foods, and the water comes from actually this place. And on the left, you see some of those natural patternings, the patterns that occur in nature and how it's all sort of connected. And so if you think about a culture that was built entirely in relationship to place itself. So there are many different kinds of indigenous peoples, and there's no such thing as pan-indigeneity. And I come from Pueblo people ancestrally in this area. And Pueblo people are very rooted in place, and we build our homes of the earth. And initially, we made our entire villages to mimic our natural environments, but also to represent the bowl, which was also the mountains, which was also the holding of people by the supreme beings of the earth and the sky, etc. And so in these photos, you can see Taos Pueblo, who maintains their sort of ancestral ways of maintaining the architectural designs, and also the same Pueblo from the sky. And so you can see the Pueblo itself is actually formed in the shape of a bowl. And so those walls and that sort of community itself show how everything is linked from the home, the community. You have the mountains, you have the town, you have the community, you have the home, which is actually a bowl. It's an earthen vessel. You have your fields that nurture and support that community. It goes closer and closer to the very center of the earth. And for every pueblo, we have a center. And I am very much informed by this belief system that everything has a reason and everything has its place. And so it's very important to me, this ancestral sort of cultural knowledge as I move forward in my life. This is a drawing I did that sort of represents those layers and down to the nurturing of self and other. And whether the metaphor is actually self there or actually the next generations, it's super important to see the sort of layers of nurturing all the way to center. And in this drawing, you can also see some of the representations of wind, of earth, of animal, of environment, of home, and all those things that nurture. Therefore, aesthetics very tied to place and ancestry and relationship. So the photo on the right is my mother, my grandmother plastering. My grandmother's an architect and a builder, and my mom is a sculptor, an artist and a builder and a farmer. And then on the left is an image of two women at Santa Clara Pueblo plastering a home. And it was the women's roles to build the home, to build the pottery, to create the vessel that life can flourish in. And then comes me, right? And I'm, this post-colonial bicultural being in the world who has experienced in the context of culture and modernity and colonization and genocide, the gift of perspective and context and its foundation, but also this deep asking of why do we do the things we do? Why do we live the way we do? Why have the things happen to us that have happened, and why do we continue to abuse each other and also our environment and ourselves? And what is this desire? And so I was gifted the resource of ceramic, of clay, of the relationship of expression with clay. In 2009, I left New Mexico and I went to Rhode Island, to Providence, to get a master's degree in creative nonfiction, actually in ceramics from the Rhode Island School of Design. And it was there that I started to take this resource and this privilege of connection to ceramic and start to deconstruct any kind of specificity to find that very point where we can get a really real human empathic response to it. So this piece is actually called Threshold, and it is a very thin clay that's slid onto a form that I forged out of metal. And so using different materials to sort of get that really deep human urges and the things that all of us can relate to that aren't so specific that they're exclusive. So here is my art from high school. And I think it's important because it puts, this ancestral context that I come from, but also in this post-colonial and postmodern context. So I grew up in Santa Clara Pueblo, adjacent to the town of Española, which is the lowrider capital of the world. And then I went to the Santa Fe Indian boarding school for high school in the late 90s. And during that time, a lot of the young people were very influenced by, hip hop culture, and, lowriders and those kinds of things. And how do you hold multiple truths at once and multiple cultures and multiple forms of expression for ourselves. I really like these drawings because they're very validating and date me to some of the core aesthetics that aren't just Indigenous, but also contextualized in, the multiple realities and sort of like drops in the water, all those different things that inform us and create us. And as people who live in post-colonial stress disorder and post-genocide context, we're searching to express ourselves and to validate ourselves. And we look for different ways to do that. And one of those is a lot of youth cultures. And I've embraced and searched, into many of those to try and find my truth and my true expression and how I can not only communicate with my peers, but others about things that are very important to me. And my audience changes what that expression will look like because I do want to communicate very deeply. This is my sculptural work. A lot of it has to do with introspection and understanding how I can dig deep enough within my core self to be incredibly honest with my identity, and in that honesty, I can find healing, growth, and connection with others, and in relationship, and a communal healing. I feel like we can really make change. And my work is functional. It might be, we talk a lot about the difference between art versus, utilitarian thing, art versus craft. And I feel like my work, even though it might be non-utilitarian, it's not a cup, but it's not a bowl, it's actually out there to do work. And that work is sometimes beyond what I prescribe to it or ascribe to it. It does its own thing, and I have to have faith in what it and where it needs to go. The piece on the left is called Exoskeleton, and the piece on the right is one of a series of busts that I did that were about identity and the honest expression of identity in a post-apocalyptic environment. So another one of my creative representations is cars. And this is because I grew up in northern New Mexico, and the border of our town was lowrider capital of the world. And when I went to graduate school for ceramics, I studied relational aesthetics. And when in relational aesthetics, I started to deconstruct what makes art and what is life. And in that, how do we transform every aspect of our life to be a creative endeavor. So when I came back from graduate school, I went to school for automotive science and auto body, and I created a custom 1985 Chevy El Camino that's based on our ceramics, our traditional ceramic black on black style. And then I started doing performances with this car where we would use the car to take up space. And in that taking up space, confronting some of the fears that keep us sort of minimalizing and minimizing our existence and our identities as people who are rarely represented in the larger social constructs. And that's a lot of fun. and really there's like art for others and art for self, and this car is very much for myself, and to sort of delve deep into my own process and how do I find empowerment and deconstruct the judgments or concepts that have been given to me that keep me from my own sort of health and growth and power. And also in that introspection, how do we hold ourselves accountable for, exposing and being transparent to our processes, and in that honesty, can we be as honest and as transparent, like I said, about our internal workings, and in that we can really connect, I feel. So these two pieces, the one on the left is about like that X-ray where you look inside and you see those patterns from the pottery and from that ancestral knowledge. And the one on the right is called Gamer, and it's trying to understand how the pieces fit together in order to have a sustainable life. And what does that look like? And how many times do we try different avenues to find a healthy existence? How many ways can I express myself? People ask me, who does your work, who is it modeled after? And they're all self-portraits, because the only story I can really tell is my own. And so they're all about different sort of journeys that I've had in life. And they come out often to look back at me and show me that process that I'm working on. And it's the ultimate the ultimate transparency is when you make something and it looks right back at you, and you have to really sit with that. And then that moment where you look deep into your own process, and then you say, goodbye, and it goes out and it does that for others, and you can't really understand, or know what their journey will be, but the intention is there. Just like that blue line in that wall that was painted over, there is hidden intention that you don't see, but it's very, very deeply rooted in what I'm doing, and I don't think that they go out there without that sort of love and foundational push. This piece on the left is called Threshold, and it's about sort of that work that we, that very, very monotonous, just put one foot in front of the other and then we can find our way through, and that way through is often through ourselves. The piece on the right is of a series of reclamation, and it's about finding our identities and empowerment in our histories and stories and timelines, and how do we apply that to our beings in order to become whole. Some of my work is more figurative, and some of my work is more abstract, and oftentimes I'm always playing with the idea of vessel. The car is a vessel, the clay is a vessel, the home is a vessel, the body is a vessel, the concepts are vessels, the intention is a vessel. These pieces were created for Savannah College of Art and Design. They're 8 feet tall. They stand on 2 points and they lean on their forehead against glass. And initially, the work was about, the work is actually called Countdown, and it was about fragility and the weight to get through something. So oftentimes it's the breaking that lets us through, the breaking down of ideas, of expectations, of the deconstructing of our previous thoughts to open up space for something else. And there were these large windows, and I felt like a great opportunity to put these pieces against these windows, and people walk on the outside of the window and they could look through the glass at the piece. And one of the wonderful things of having them installed and then seeing that was that when people walk down the street, they'd actually see their reflection in the glass. And there was so many layers to that concept. I also did these large metal pieces that hung on the wall from behind, and then they had these vinyl pieces that were stuck to the window, which were to create shadows that would find right place. So the star would eventually find itself, and that was about guidance and directive. How we are manifesting our realities and how we are responsible for that. These pieces represent that sort of holding up the world and holding up that nurturing and being responsible for that directive and intention. This is a series of work. This is a solo at the Nevada Museum of Art that is actually up currently. And I made these 4 earth beings that were emerging from the ground with these vessels on their heads. And they spoke to accountability, and that, there is consciousness in what we consider the inanimate things in our world, that there is eyes of a greater thing watching us all the time. And we often forget that, and so we forget to act in accordance with that consciousness of respect and relationship. And so one of my greatest pieces is that I'm a mom. My daughter is 4, and my art changed entirely when I became a parent. And I think I never understood the true creative nature until I created another human, and that the responsibility, the unconditional love, the fear, the intimacy and vulnerability that comes with it, and how we're taught to be parents, what we're told parenting looks like, how we take that and deconstruct it and try to do better, and understand, like, when we can love that deeply, how we feel the presence of a larger parent, in a sense, and become sort of aware of that. And so my work is sort of, oftentimes it reemerges this new perspective of my parenting journey. But most of what I do is about relationship, and relationship, I feel, is everything. And relationship is everything, from our relationship to self, to family, to partner, to a Most High, to faith in the direction that we're going, and how that relationship always keeps us not alone, I guess. We're always with other, even if it's self, and those times of true emptiness where we find companionship and strength in a community that may look different than what we think it does, because it exists in all things. So this is a piece that was specifically about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And it was about sort of empowerment and companionship, and the moment of heartbreak, and how do we find strength to create a new reality. And I made these two pieces that represented, I called them river girls, because there was a young girl from my tribe that was found in the river, real close to my studio as I was making these. And I made these pieces, and every bead on the arms was a prayer. Every day that I worked in the clay was a prayer for strength and for protection and for clarity. And when I was done with these pieces, I took them down to the river and put them in the water. Before they went off onto their mission of art shows and wherever they needed to go in the world, I went and put them in the water, just downstream from where this girl was found. And a friend of mine, Kate Russell, came down and got to photograph that moment, which felt like the culmination of my relationship with this work was that. And then they can go on and do what they need to do in the world, but how does the art making process be creative and manifesting and in relationship to that creative process of being a parent, but also making these pieces that go out into the world in deep intention, with deep intention, I feel is what reminds me every day of the responsibility of our individual power in relationship to the world. This is a life-size piece, sort of about that moment of guidance and strength and inner awareness. So what's on the chest is actually a star, and the star is that guidance, and it's that heart that has that moment of finding the path. And in that moment of seeing that path or having faith in that journey, that we are incredibly empowered, stable, protected, supported, and directed. And hopefully when we really, find that journey within ourselves and find the strength to express ourselves in those ways and and so every day that I come to the studio, I always take a moment to just recognize how lucky, how blessed, how privileged I am, or I have been, to be able to do art for a living, to create and work with the layers of concept, of spirit, of intuition that I get to work with, every day as a living. And I really feel like it's a muscle. it's a muscle that we have to work with, and that muscle gets stronger, and it gets stronger, and that intention becomes an easier thing to do. And when we see, the more that I project, or I can identify, I want to say consciousness in inanimate things, the easier it gets for me to have empathic responses to the world around me, and to ask permission whenever I do something, right? So, and that's the idea. I'm not perfect, that's for sure. I'm still trying to learn. I'm still struggling through, understanding this humanity, and where my journeys with spirituality and with, my own psychology and perspectives on all that, all the multifacets of that experience, they all kind of shine towards like this one very strong intention and being. And the more that I work in my clay, and the more that I get to experiment with that and experience that, and the more I'm supported in that, the more I can foster and build on that intention. And that's really beautiful.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you for watching the film about my studio process and a lot of my inspirations. I'm gonna share a short film about the piece that I made specifically for the CAC conference. And this piece is called Tonantzin. And then we can talk a little bit more about it afterwards. And I look forward to a Q&A. So thank you. This is Tonantzin. She's a clay, metal, leather, mixed media sculpture that I made in 2020. She has leather coming from her hair. She has these energetic orbs coming off of her. And then the plant decorations on her are the flowers of Osha, or bear root, which is a medicine. In her left hand, she has clay, and it's actually an unfired piece of clay that my daughter was playing with. In her other hand, she has a small satchel with Osha root in it. She has coverings in the front and the back, and all the way down to her feet. We have a steel and tile base with leather flowers, leather and ceramic flowers. This is her. She will be available at Chiaroscuro Contemporary Art for the conference attendees, and the conference attendees only. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Rose. That was wonderful. So
Thank you.
I want to make sure I pronounce her name properly. Tonantzin, or how do you say her name again?
Yes, Tonantzin.
Tonantzin.
And
Okay, wonderful.
like I said, yeah, she's going to be available at Chiaroscuro Contemporary Art, my gallery in Santa Fe. He's going to be holding her specifically for conference attendees for a limited time, just so that everyone can go see her in person, or build a relationship with her if need be.
Thank you so much.
What's so funny? Sorry.
That is so special, Rose. Thank you so much. I love the orbs that you put around her, and the leather flowers at her feet. Can you speak a little bit on that?
So Tonantzin, this piece I actually was inspired by, if you're familiar with La Virgen de Guadalupe, which is an incredibly influential force in northern New Mexico, and specifically in this area. And growing up, really seeing how La Virgen de Guadalupe was honored and was turned into depictions that were then used as protection and direction, all those beautiful things that I grew up with. I did not grow up Catholic. I grew up traditionally with my native religion, but I grew up in a strong Catholic community. And so seeing this being was super inspiring and beautiful. And then when I did some research about La Virgen de Guadalupe, I found out that she's actually was based on Marian apparitions that were seen by indigenous peoples in Central America and Mexico, and that she was actually Tonantzin actually means our mother, and Guadalupe is actually a Spanish language translation of the word Coatlique, and Coatlique was Nahuatl for a special mother being in the community. And so I really loved that finding the beauty in the translation and indigenous translation of spirituality as cultures come together, either peacefully or not. We find our ways to build guidance and apply our belief systems in beautiful ways. And the orbs in this piece are very much to reference the spiritual energy that La Virgen de Guadalupe and also Tonantzin and Coatlique carried with themselves.
Thank you. It's beautiful. There are a lot of questions coming in, a lot of whys and gratitude for your work. So I want to get to some questions. We have a few minutes. I do want to ask, you did talk about post-colonial, you mentioned post-colonial stress disorder in your presentation. And so the question that comes to me is, can you share with us how that shows up, or what is the important thing for people to understand about that? And if there is something that we should either know or do to address that?
So I learned the term post-colonial stress disorder from a professor at the Institute of American Indian Arts and Native Art History specifically. So we were talking about the aesthetic transition to modernity, and a lot of that being based on the trauma of colonization and genocide. And so if you think about it, colonization in the Americas is very recent, it's very fresh. And so a lot of indigenous peoples had, now we're looking at, we have evidence of over 20,000 years or more of living in a place and building a spiritual relationship to a space. And then all of a sudden, in only a couple hundred years, we're dealing with an entirely new reality based on colonization and genocide. And that shift and that transition has not necessarily been graceful. It's been incredibly painful in lots of ways. And that pain is still carried and reflected daily, and often every minute of every day where we look and we see our stolen land, our abused children, our missing women, our loss of language and culture and life ways, the abuses of the Indian boarding school systems was huge as an assimilation and genocide tactic, and how we've internalized those really destructive mannerisms within our own cultures, and how do we look at that and deconstruct that, and sometimes in my life, it's not so bad. And if I just pay attention to it for a minute, it feels like being assaulted a million times a day. And that's how I would call post-colonial stress disorder, is a constant assault where everything you look at hurts. It hurts, it hurts, it hurts, and it doesn't stop hurting. And so I think that a lot of trauma, like a lot of people, indigenous peoples, are living with that trauma of watching love be crushed, the things that we care for be destroyed,
watching our children being stolen. All those things have really, really deep ancestral consequences. And so I feel like we haven't really addressed that. We're not even, we have, in the news, we're seeing a lot of attention on one person. And we're not seeing what's happening at our southern border. We're not seeing what's happening to our Indigenous people or people of color across the continents, across the Americas. We're not addressing the differences in realities and who has power and who's creating voice, who has the voice to speak and who isn't, who's getting the support and who isn't in these times. And I feel like, just to address like that idea of action, like how do we personally build relationship to that reality, is first to see it and pay attention to it and educate ourselves on some of those horrors. And instead of feeling self-righteous and feeling like, no, that's not true, or I can't handle that kind of ancestral abuse, to sit with that hardship. And I feel like if we can really sit in those yucky feelings, that we can really get to the core of what action looks like. And instead of trying to fix it by managing guilt, I think that the best thing we can do is really go internal and look at inside into our own intimacy and our own vulnerability and our own transparent emotional spaces. Because what makes us still do this? Because every single day, this is still happening. We're still in the genocide. This is it right now. It's still happening, and we're still doing it, and we're still taking land, and we're still taking power from people, and we're still destroying our planet. And so how do we, in our own very intimate and personal spaces, make those really conscious decisions that are incredibly self-aware? And I think that's the first step. Instead of thinking what we can do for someone else, we need to think about how do we look at the yucky places inside of ourselves so that we can be stronger and more aware of which way to go.
Thank you. That reminds me of a lot of shadow work and awareness, and a lot of what this conference is about, going inside and taking a look, and standing in the sacred space. So many requests for El Camino, Maria, and pictures of that. A lot of wows about the work. Jenna asks, how do you navigate intention versus outcome in your own work?
I think that there's expectation and then there's intention. And oftentimes I am navigating approval, right? So we think about what approval looks like. And oftentimes I feel like that is based on objectification. So what is expected of me, right? Am I supposed to behave? Am I supposed to look a certain way? Am I supposed to act a certain way? Is my art supposed to be palatable, easy to digest, right? And so there's a lot of expectations that we're dealing with. And for me, I think that I try and back that up and say, I believe that my intention is going to manifest exactly what it's supposed to be. So I have a sketchbook that I draw my art before I make it. And I only do that for engineering purposes, to make sure that it actually stands up. It won't tip over or crash or break, right? And I make them rough enough. And then I sort of ask the work, what do you need to look like? What do you need to say? And how do you do that? So I spend a lot of time in my studio saying, who do you want to be? Do you want to wear earrings? Do you like this, pattern on your body? And sometimes it's very clear no. And who's telling me? It's a good question. Like, who am I listening to when I'm asking these questions? And sometimes I think, when I'm making something for a deadline or for a specific show, I just kind of am waiting for that direction. And I know that if I just start moving and I just start making, that whatever is supposed to be at that space, at that time, is going to make itself, create itself.
And me, I'm just the tool. I'm just the pliers that thing is using to create itself and to come into being. And all I have to do is listen.
Beautiful, Rose. Thank you. When you did mention the consciousness of what we consider inanimate objects, or are inanimate, but there's a consciousness to them. Myra, or Maria, asks, please tell us a little more about the symbolism you have incorporated into the beautiful sculpture you made for CAC. What is the significance of barefoot and osha root, the glittery spots on her body, etc.? Thank you so much. I don't know if it's possible to pull the picture back up, but if you could elaborate on, how she spoke to you when you were creating her for CONSPIRE.
So yeah, so oftentimes I put markings on the work that have very basic and intentions. The amount of spots, I'm always counting how many times I'll put dots in certain places, because it matters. It's either years, it's directions. There's 7 directions. There's the 4, northwest, south, and east, and then there's up and down and center, right? So there's 7 directions. So oftentimes we'll see the number 7 represented on my work, just to be holistic about the intention. But in this piece specifically, the dots, the white dots that you see on the surface, are actually the flower of the osha root, the bear root, and we actually, the root itself is the medicine, but it's really cool to see that it's actually the calling of the insects to create this from the world, and this beautiful expression of self-love and asking. A flower is such an ask, and also a moment of self-love that medicine is putting out there in the world. And so this mother, this ultimate mother, has this medicine flower. She's covered in medicine flowers. And in her pouch, she also actually has some of that medicine root in it. And then on the other side is the raw, unfired clay. She's made of clay. She's fired. That clay, if it's not broken, it's vitrified. It will be in this planet forever, right? It's a really the moment of actually vitrifying clay, of firing it, makes it permanent in a very, very strange way. There's this, we look in ancestral sites, and what survives is the pottery, because it's vitreous. It's so solid. It's meant to last through time. So that intention, my fingerprints, are not just for now. It's intended to go for a very, very long time. And the clay in her hand that's unfired, if you put it in the water, it'll turn back into dust, or it'll turn back into mud. It's still pliable, and it's about that, she is already built, she's already created, she's standing in her manifestation, but she has the tools to make the next iteration of beauty. And what's crazy is I was just listening to what I was saying, and I realized that this is one of the few pieces that I haven't seen as a self-portrait. As I was making it, I was making someone specific. And then I was listening to this, and I said, all my pieces are self-portraits. And I was like, oh, can I see that inside myself? Can I look at this piece and stand in front of her and see myself? And I don't know if I'm ready yet, but wow. I'll try.
Beautiful, beautiful. Rosanna, you created her, and she's a creator, with all that potential that she's holding of clay that can yet be used. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. So lots of gratitude still coming in. A comment from Doug Jack. He goes, does threshold and clay itself speak about the enmeshing of both your corporal and symbolic self? And then he says, I have loved your work for quite some time, and meeting you in this context and community is a tremendous blessing.
Oh, thank you. I think the work is super symbolic, and I think my process of my creative process has been so much about taking off what's not necessary. So, for instance, a lot of my work doesn't have hair. And people ask me, why doesn't your work have hair? And it's so based on identity and culture, and it has so many references to gender and all these things. And so I take it off. I don't need it. It's not what I'm trying to say. Eyes are important. Ears are important as we're listening. Our nose, the smell, our ability to speak, and the moment of silence. And when the mouth is closed, it's in a moment of watching and notice. And so so many parts of my work is based on the symbolism around a moment of core identity, of core intention. It's like, how do you shave off all the junk till there's nothing but the yummy stuff, the good stuff, the best part, you know? And I'm still trying to figure that out all the time, you know? And you know, we get caught up in like, what else do I want to add, and ooh, this would be cool. And part of it is, can we make space? And if a piece is wearing a necklace of beautiful beads that I found that were glass that was found on the shores of Africa from the trade, and it's a collaboration with the ocean because the beads are so beautiful and weathered because they rolled in the water, and now they're gracing the neck of this sculpture. That was so intentional. You know, it was so intentional about like, this moment, this matters, and there's power and intention in it and relationship with it.
Yes. So we have about 4 minutes left, and I want to make sure that I get in this question, just because, you know, this conference is about the theme, me, us, the world, my story, our story, the story, God's great story unfolding. And Richard has always been about, you know, waking up so that we can show up in the world to help the suffering in the world. So as an Indigenous woman surrounded by Christianity and Catholicism, and with the post-colonial distress disorder that you spoke of, what do you think, Rose, is the single most pressing social justice issue for the Native community right now?
I feel like no one's going to survive if we don't take care of our Mother Earth. And our Earth and our planet is vital. And everyone, I mean, you see the treatment of women, I think, is so super linked to the reflection of the treatment of our planet. When we see that abuse, I turn around and I see that to the earth and the dirt and the our natural environment that has cared for and nurtured us forever. And if we want to, you know, even continue as a human species in the world, it's time to really, really look within. And that what you said about those shadow spaces and that shadow work, we need to look within, because within, deep in the ugliest, darkest little places inside ourselves is, I feel, where the answers are. And it's not necessarily out there, it's in here. And I feel like every culture has tools to access that. And I don't, you know, and we all have our really destructive ones too. You know, nobody has, I feel like in history, everyone has their dark sides and their power trips and things like that. And the way that we can be destructive to each other in our environment and our our relationship to our natural world, our natural family. But I feel like we all have to do this work. No one's exempt at this point, because we're all on this planet and we all depend on our love for her so deeply. And this is the time. This is it. We got to do it now.
Yeah, thank you, Mama. And I know you work closely with your own mother, who is involved with permaculture. So we'll end with this. It's not a question, Anonymous sends, or rather gratitude for your work. Met your grandmother, mom many years ago with Lee Swenson. administration and respect, admiration, respect, and inspiration for all. So the work that you are doing, Rose, is generational, as you mentioned. And so if you could speak a little bit about that work with your mother and the permaculture and what she taught you, and how you're carrying that forward, and we can end with that.
My grandmother was brilliant, Rena Swensel, a magical, brilliant being who defied those boxes and became a wonderful thing. And because of that, my mother had some exceptional tools for that self-awareness and growth and challenging the stereotypes and doing the things that she felt were important because she had that guidance of my grandma. And because of my mother, you know, I was out fixing cars, and the agency, the beautiful agency in my family where we ask those questions and we're told that we can do those things, whether it's drive a tractor, grow your food, or say the thing that might be hard to hear. And I know my daughter is the next one. I see it in her every day.
Wonderful. We're so excited that there's a little Rose running around. Thank you. It's wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us, Rose. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate your work and how it's being passed down from generation to generation. Rose, this is so meaningful and heartfelt. Thank you for all the beauty you're bringing into the world and the awareness that comes with it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody.